The thunder of hooves echoed through the dusty main street of Copper Creek as Mabel Wilson pressed herself against the weathered wall of the general store, trying to make herself even smaller than her already diminutive frame. At 18 years old and barely reaching 5 feet in height, she had long ago learned that invisibility was her best defense in a world that had never shown her much kindness. The year was 1878, and the Arizona Territory was no place for a young woman alone, especially not one who had spent her entire life being reminded of her shortcomings. Mabel tugged at the frayed sleeves of her dress, a hand-me-down from the orphanage that had been her home until they'd declared her old enough to make her own way in the world 6 months ago. "Look at the little runt," called out a gruff voice. It was Thomas Harding, the blacksmith's son, who never tired of making her the target of his cruelty. "Still trying to grow, Mabel? Maybe if you stand in the rain, you'll sprout like a bean," his friends laughed, their mockery cutting through the warm afternoon air. Mabel kept her eyes fixed on the ground, counting the seconds until they would grow bored and move on. "I heard Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house is thinking of hiring her to dust the high shelves," another voice chimed in. "Says she can just climb up the furniture like a child." Fresh laughter erupted, and Mabel felt heat crawl up her neck. She had indeed been seeking work at the boarding house, desperate for any employment that would put food in her belly. "That's enough," a deep voice cut through the taunts, silencing the group instantly. Mabel glanced up to see a tall figure dismounting from a magnificent chestnut stallion. She'd seen him around town, Cole Nichols, who owned the cattle ranch on the north side of the valley. He was new to Copper Creek, having arrived only last spring, but his reputation as a fair employer and skilled horseman had spread quickly. "Don't you boys have anything better to do than harass a lady?" Cole asked, his voice carrying an authority that needed no volume to command attention. Thomas shuffled his feet, suddenly finding great interest in the dirt beneath his boots. "We were just having some fun, Nichols." "Find your fun elsewhere," Cole replied evenly, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol, not a threat, but a reminder. The young men muttered under their breath but dispersed quickly enough. Mabel remained pressed against the wall, unsure whether to thank her defender or flee. At 26, Cole Nichols cut an imposing figure, broad-shouldered with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, approaching slowly as if afraid he might startle her. "Yes, thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "They don't mean any real harm," Cole's expression darkened. "Seems harmful enough to me." He glanced down the street where a crowd had gathered for the arrival of the weekly stagecoach. "Were you heading somewhere?" Mabel nodded. "The boarding house. Mrs. Peterson might have work for me." "Let me take you there," he offered, then seeing her hesitation, added, "Those fellows might circle back once I'm gone." Before she could protest, he stepped toward his horse and gestured for her to follow. The massive stallion snorted as they approached, making Mabel step back involuntarily. "This is Thunder," Cole said with a gentle smile. "Don't let his size fool you. He's got the temperament of a lamb." Mabel eyed the distance to the ground. "I appreciate your offer, Mr. Nichols, but I don't think I can." Understanding dawned in his eyes. Without a word, Cole bent down and with strong yet careful hands lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. Before she could process what was happening, she found herself seated side-saddle on the magnificent horse, higher above the ground than she'd ever been. "Hold tight," he instructed, mounting behind her in one fluid motion. His arms came around her to grasp the reins, creating a secure circle that made her feel strangely safe. As they rode down the main street, Mabel became acutely aware of the stares. But for once, they weren't looks of mockery or pity. Cole Nichols, one of the most respected men in the territory, had lifted her onto his horse proudly, as if she were someone who mattered. "Which way to the boarding house?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "End of the street, the white building with the blue trim," she replied, trying to ignore the unfamiliar flutter in her chest. As they rode, Cole didn't press her with questions or unwanted conversation. Instead, he pointed out a hawk circling overhead and commented on the unusually mild weather for late September. His easy manner gradually relaxed her tense shoulders. When they reached the boarding house, he dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. His hands were strong at her waist, and for a brief moment as he set her on the ground, their eyes met. "Thank you, Mr. Nichols," she said, finding her voice at last. "Cole," he corrected with a smile that transformed his serious face. "And it was my pleasure, Miss Wilson, Mabel Wilson." "Miss Wilson," he tipped his hat. "Good luck with Mrs. Peterson. She's stern but fair." With that, he remounted and rode away, leaving Mabel standing on the porch steps with the strange feeling that something important had just happened, though she couldn't quite name what it was. Mrs. Peterson did indeed hire her, though not for dusting high shelves as the boys had mocked. Instead, Mabel found herself responsible for laundry, mending, and helping prepare meals for the boarders. The work was hard but honest, and Mrs. Peterson provided a small room at the back of the house as part of her wages. For 3 weeks, Mabel didn't see Cole Nichols again, though she found herself scanning the street whenever she went into town for supplies. She told herself it was merely gratitude that made her think of him, nothing more. Then one rain-soaked Tuesday, as she hurried back to the boarding house with a basket of provisions, a wagon came careening around the corner. The driver, clearly struggling with frightened horses, shouted a warning. Mabel froze in the middle of the street, the heavy basket preventing her from moving quickly enough. Suddenly, a strong arm caught her around the waist, and she was pulled from the path of the wagon just as it thundered past, mud spraying in its wake. She found herself pressed against a familiar broad chest, the scent of leather and pine enveloping her. "We have to stop meeting like this, Miss Wilson," Cole said, his voice light though his eyes were serious as they scanned her for injury. "You seem to have a habit of rescuing me, Mr. Nichols," she replied, surprised at her own boldness. He smiled, releasing her slowly. "Cole," he reminded her, then nodded at her mud-splattered dress. "Are you hurt?" "Only my pride," she assured him, glancing down at her ruined clothing. "And Mrs. Peterson's eggs, I'm afraid." Cole looked at the overturned basket where broken eggshells mixed with the mud. "Let me replace those for you." "That's not necessary," she protested. "I insist," he said, already picking up the basket and salvaging what items he could. "Besides, I need supplies myself. We can visit the general store together." As they walked side by side, Mabel felt the curious stares of townsfolk. A woman passing by nodded respectfully to Cole while giving Mabel an appraising look. Cole didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he gave no indication that he cared what others thought of him walking with the orphan girl. "How are you finding your position at the boarding house?" he asked as they approached the general store. "Mrs. Peterson is fair, as you said. The work suits me." "But," he prompted, evidently hearing something in her tone. Mabel hesitated. "It's only that I always imagined I might someday have a home of my own, a place where I belong." She immediately regretted the confession, feeling foolish for sharing such personal thoughts. Cole didn't mock her dream, though. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "Everyone deserves a place to call their own. I didn't feel settled until I bought my ranch last year." Inside the store, Cole greeted the proprietor and explained they needed eggs. As they gathered supplies, he asked Mabel's opinion on various items, treating her as if her thoughts mattered. It was a novel experience, and she found herself relaxing in his company. "My housekeeper left last month to marry a man in Tucson," Cole mentioned as they exited the store. "The house is getting rather untidy." "I imagine it's difficult to manage a ranch and a household," Mabel replied. "More than difficult, nearly impossible," he admitted with a rueful smile. "I was wondering if you might consider a position there instead. The pay would be better than what Mrs. Peterson offers, and you'd have your own quarters in the house." Mabel stopped walking, stunned by the unexpected offer. "You want to hire me, but you hardly know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "You're diligent, you don't complain even when you have cause to, and you've managed to stay kind despite how this town treats you." His directness was startling but refreshing. "Think about it. No need to decide today." Before she could formulate a response, a commotion down the street caught their attention. A man on horseback was approaching at a gallop, his expression urgent. "Cole," the rider called, reining in his horse. "There's trouble at Weaver's Creek. Outlaws hit the McAllister place." "They're moving toward town." Cole's expression hardened. "How many?" "5, maybe 6. They've already shot old man McAllister." "Get the sheriff," Cole ordered, then turned to Mabel. "Get back to the boarding house and stay inside." Without waiting for her response, he strode toward the saloon, presumably to gather more men. Mabel hurried back to Mrs. Peterson's, her mind racing not with fear of outlaws, but with the unexpected job offer that could change everything. The outlaws never reached town. Cole and a hastily formed posse intercepted them at the creek crossing, resulting in a shootout that left 2 bandits dead and the rest in custody. The news traveled quickly through Copper Creek, and Cole's already solid reputation was further enhanced by his quick action. 3 days later, Mabel found herself walking the mile-long path to the Nichols ranch, having accepted his offer after careful consideration. Mrs. Peterson had been surprisingly supportive, remarking that a position in a proper household might be a step up for a girl with no family connections. The ranch house came into view as she crested a small hill, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch and tall windows. It was larger than she had expected, and well built, though the yard showed signs of neglect with unmowed grass and scattered tools. Cole emerged from the barn as she approached, wiping his hands on a cloth. When he spotted her, a smile broke across his face that made her stomach flip unexpectedly. "Miss Wilson," he greeted her, crossing to take her small carpet bag. "I'm glad you decided to accept my offer." "Thank you for the opportunity," she replied formally, suddenly nervous now that she was actually here. He showed her around the property, the barn with its 8 horses, the chicken coop that needed attention, the vegetable garden that had seen better days. The tour continued inside the house, which was indeed in a state of bachelor disarray, though the structure itself was well crafted with good furniture and surprisingly homey touches. "This would be your room," he said, opening a door to reveal a pleasant chamber with a window overlooking the eastern hills. It was larger than any space she'd ever had to herself, with a real bed instead of a cot and a small writing desk in the corner. "It's lovely," she breathed, unable to hide her delight. "I'm glad you approve," Cole said, watching her reaction with evident satisfaction. "I'll leave you to settle in. Dinner is usually at 6, but today I thought we might eat earlier so we can discuss your duties." Alone in her new room, Mabel unpacked her meager belongings, still not quite believing the turn her life had taken. From being mocked on the streets to having a room in a fine house, all because a kind man had lifted her onto his horse and treated her with dignity. The following weeks established a routine. Mabel rose early to prepare breakfast, then spent her days bringing order to the neglected house. Cole was often out with his men tending to cattle or handling ranch business, but they shared meals and, increasingly, conversation. She learned that Cole had come west from Pennsylvania after the war, working his way up from cowhand to foreman before saving enough to buy his own spread. He'd lost his parents young, she discovered. Creating an unexpected bond between them, both understood what it meant to make your way alone in the world. As October turned to November, Mabel found herself watching for Cole's return each day, enjoying their evening conversations by the fire where he would share books from his small but carefully curated library. Sometimes he read aloud, his deep voice bringing stories to life in a way that made her forget the harsh realities that had shaped her past. The first snow came early that year, dusting the hills with white and bringing a peaceful quiet to the ranch. Mabel was in the kitchen preparing stew when Cole burst through the door, his cheeks ruddy from cold. "You need to see this," he announced, his eyes bright with excitement. Without explanation, he took her hand and led her to the porch. Outside, the world had been transformed. The setting sun cast a golden glow across the snow-covered landscape, making it shimmer like something from a fairy tale. But it was what stood in the yard that made Mabel gasp. A small sleigh, polished and ready, hitched to Cole's gentlest mare. "I found it in the back of the barn," he explained. "Belonged to the previous owner. I spent the last few evenings fixing it up." He paused, suddenly looking uncertain. "I thought you might enjoy a ride before dinner." Mabel stared at him, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "I've never been in a sleigh before." "Then we should remedy that immediately," he said, offering his arm. The ride was magical. Wrapped in thick blankets with Cole beside her, Mabel felt a happiness she hadn't known was possible. They glided over the snow-covered fields as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, their breath creating clouds in the crisp air. "Thank you," she said softly as they turned back toward the house. "For everything." Cole glanced at her, his expression serious in the fading light. "You've brought something to this house that was missing, Mabel. Before you came, it was just a building. Now it feels like a home." His words warmed her more than any blanket could. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the wind outside her window, Mabel acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Cole Nichols. It was a frightening realization. He was her employer, after all, and while he treated her with respect, she had no reason to believe he saw her as anything more than his housekeeper. December brought preparations for Christmas, the first Mabel would celebrate outside the orphanage. Cole surprised her by bringing home a small pine tree, which they decorated with paper stars and strings of dried berries. The house filled with the scent of gingerbread and pine, creating a coziness that made the cold winter nights feel magical. As Christmas approached, the town organized a holiday gathering at the church. Cole asked if Mabel would like to attend with him, and though she was nervous about facing the townsfolk who had mocked her for so long, she agreed. The night of the social, Cole waited at the foot of the stairs as Mabel descended in her best dress, a deep green wool that she had carefully altered to fit her small frame. She had pinned her hair up and borrowed a drop of rosewater from the bottle Cole's sister had sent as an early Christmas gift. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his gray eyes warm with admiration. The ride to town was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the church, Mabel could see it was already crowded, lanterns glowing in the windows and the sound of music spilling out into the night. "We don't have to stay long," Cole assured her, helping her down from the wagon. Inside, heads turned as they entered. Mabel felt the weight of curious stares but was surprised when several women approached to greet them warmly. Mrs. Peterson was particularly effusive, commenting on how well Mabel looked and inquiring about life at the ranch. "Your housekeeper has worked wonders with you, Cole," the older woman declared. "You're looking less like a wild man these days." Cole laughed, his hand resting lightly on Mabel's back. "Miss Wilson has improved more than just my appearance. My cooking nearly killed my last ranch hand before she arrived." The evening progressed more pleasantly than Mabel had dared hope. She even found herself enjoying a dance with Cole, who moved with surprising grace for such a tall man. He kept his steps small to accommodate her, never making her feel awkward about their height difference. It was during their second dance that Thomas Harding appeared, clearly having had too much of the punch that someone had spiked with whiskey. "Well, if it isn't little Mabel," he slurred, stepping too close. "Got yourself a protector, did you? Smart move for a runt like you." Cole's arm tightened around her waist. "Walk away, Harding," he warned, his voice low. "Just making conversation," Thomas persisted. "Wondering what services she provides up at that lonely ranch to earn her keep." The implication hung in the air, ugly and poisonous. Before Cole could respond, Mabel stepped forward, years of pent-up hurt and anger finally finding voice. "The only service I provide, Mr. Harding, is honest work, something you might learn about if you ever stopped hiding behind your father's reputation." Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded. "And I would rather be small in stature than small in character." A shocked silence fell over the nearby dancers. Thomas's face flushed dark red, but before he could retort, his father appeared and firmly steered him away, offering a curt apology. Cole looked at Mabel with undisguised admiration. "I think we've had enough socializing for one evening," he said, offering his arm. "Unless you'd like to stay, I'm ready to go home," she replied, the word home feeling right on her tongue. The ride back to the ranch was quiet but comfortable. Snow had begun to fall again, coating the world in fresh white. When they reached the house, Cole helped her down, but instead of heading inside, he kept hold of her hand. "I have something for you," he said, leading her to the barn. Inside, he lit a lantern and walked to the back corner where a cloth-covered object stood. "Christmas is still a few days away," Mabel protested. "This isn't exactly a Christmas gift," Cole explained, removing the cloth to reveal a beautifully crafted rocking chair sized perfectly for her smaller frame. "I've been working on it in the evenings." Mabel stared at the chair, then at Cole, unable to find words. He'd made this with his own hands, specifically for her. No one had ever created something just for her before. "May I?" she asked, approaching the chair with reverence. Cole nodded, watching as she settled into it. The seat was the perfect depth, the arms at just the right height. She rocked experimentally, finding the motion smooth and comforting. "Do you like it?" he asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "It's the most wonderful gift I've ever received," she answered honestly, looking up at him with eyes that shimmered in the lantern light. Cole knelt beside the chair, bringing his face level with hers. "Mabel," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I didn't bring you here just to be my housekeeper." Her heart skipped. "You didn't?" "No." He took her small hands in his larger ones. "I brought you here because from the moment I lifted you onto Thunder that day, I couldn't stop thinking about you. Your courage, your kindness despite everything," he broke off, seeming to struggle for words. "I'm not asking you to be my housekeeper anymore. I'm asking if you might consider being my wife." Mabel felt as if the world had tilted on its axis. "Your wife," she echoed, certain she had misheard. "I love you, Mabel Wilson," Cole said simply. "I don't care what anyone in town thinks. I don't care that you're small, though I find your size perfectly charming. I care that you've made this house a home. I care that you see the good in a world that hasn't always been good to you. I care that, when I ride home each day, knowing you're here makes everything worthwhile." Tears filled Mabel's eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "But I have nothing to offer you. No family, no dowry. You have everything to offer," he interrupted gently. "You have yourself. That's all I want." In answer, Mabel leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. A kiss that conveyed what words could not, that she loved him too. Had loved him since he lifted her onto his horse and showed her what it meant to be valued. When they broke apart, Cole's smile was brighter than the lantern light. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes." They were married on Christmas Eve in the ranch house with only the minister, Mrs. Peterson, and Cole's foreman as witnesses. Mabel wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Peterson had helped her make, with sprigs of winter berries in her hair instead of a veil. News of their marriage spread quickly through Copper Creek. Some tongues wagged. Of course, the successful rancher and the orphan girl made unlikely match in many eyes. But as winter melted into spring and spring bloomed into summer, even the most skeptical townspeople had to admit that the couple seemed perfectly suited. Cole built a special mounting block so Mabel could easily climb onto her own horse, a gentle mare he gifted her on their 1-month anniversary. They were often seen riding together across the ranch, her small figure beside his tall one, perfectly balanced in their differences. A year after their wedding, as autumn painted the hills in gold and crimson, Mabel gave birth to their first child, a daughter with her father's gray eyes and her mother's determined spirit. Cole lifted the infant proudly, marveling at how tiny she was in his large hands. "She's perfect," he declared, settling beside Mabel on the bed. "Small but mighty, just like her mother." Mabel smiled, watching her husband cradle their daughter with gentle confidence. "What shall we name her? How about Hope?" Cole suggested. Because that's what you gave me when you came into my life. As the years passed, the Nichols ranch flourished. 2 more children joined their family, a son and another daughter. Cole expanded his holdings, becoming one of the most respected cattlemen in the territory. Mabel, no longer defined by her size or her orphan status, became known for her generosity and the warm, welcome visitors received at the ranch. On their 5th anniversary, Cole surprised Mabel by taking her back to the spot in town where they had first met, the wall of the general store where she had tried to make herself invisible that fateful day. "You remember?" he asked, standing beside her on the now busy street. "How could I forget?" she replied, looking up at him with eyes that still held the same wonder they had the day he lifted her onto his horse. "I saw you trying to disappear," Cole said softly, "and all I could think was how bright you shined even as you tried to hide." Mabel took his hand, her small fingers fitting perfectly between his larger ones. "You were the first person who ever really saw me. And you were the first person who made me feel truly seen," he countered, bending to kiss her forehead. As they walked back to their waiting horses, Mabel reflected on how far she had come from the lonely orphan girl mocked for her size. Cole lifted her onto her horse, as he still sometimes did, not because she needed the help anymore, but because it had become their ritual, a reminder of the moment that had changed both their lives. From her perch on the saddle, Mabel looked down at her husband, his face tilted up to hers with love that had only deepened with time. She leaned down to kiss him, no longer concerned with who might be watching or what they might think. "Ready to go home?" Cole asked when they parted. Mabel nodded, her heart full. Home. Not just a place, but a feeling of belonging, of being valued, of love given and received freely. What had once seemed an impossible dream for a small orphan girl had become her reality, all because a kind cowboy had lifted her onto his horse and shown her how it felt to stand tall. As they rode side by side through the town that had once been the setting of her humiliation, Mabel held her head high. The mocking voices of the past were silenced now, drowned out by the steady rhythm of hoofbeats carrying them home where they belonged, together.